There is a fear running your life, not the fears you know about, not the ones you can name and point to and say, yes, that thing, I know that thing scares me. This one is quieter than that, more constant, more embedded, so deeply woven into the way you move through the world that it doesn't feel like a fear at all. It feels like just the way things are. It shapes which opportunities you pursue and which ones you let pass. It shapes the conversations you have and the ones you avoid. It shapes the version of yourself you allow other people to see and the version you keep carefully out of sight. And almost nobody ever traces it back to its actual source. Because the source is not modern. It is not personal. It is not a product of your specific history or your particular circumstances. It is ancient. Older than any culture currently alive. Older than written language. Older than almost any idea the human mind has ever produced, and it has been controlling human behavior for so long that most people have stopped recognizing it as fear at all. They just call it life. Here is where it begins, not with an emotion, with a calculation. 50,000 years ago, your ancestor faces a decision. There is a new hunting ground beyond the next ridge, potentially rich with game, potentially dangerous with rivals, unknown terrain with unknown rule. The reward of going is significant, but the cost of going wrong is final. And so the brain that survived, the brain that is now inside you, learned to perform a very specific calculation before committing to any action. What is the worst thing that could happen? And if the worst thing that could happen is bad enough, is any potential reward worth the risk of it? Psychologists call this loss aversion. The finding, replicated across decades of research and thousands of studies, that human beings feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. Losing $20 hurts approximately twice as much as finding $20 feels good. Twice the same amount of money. The same transaction in reverse. A completely asymmetric emotional response. And this asymmetry is not a quirk of psychology. It is the direct inheritance of a world where losses, particularly certain kinds of losses, were not recoverable. You could lose food and find more. You could lose shelter and rebuild. But there were losses that once incurred left no second chance. And the brain that weighted potential loss more heavily than potential gain was the brain that avoided those terminal mistakes. The brain that survived. The brain you inherited. Now here is how this ancient calculation becomes the fear controlling modern life. Because loss aversion doesn't just operate on money or physical resources, it operates on everything the ancient brain learned to treat as a survival asset. Status, belonging, certainty, control, and the most powerful of all, the one that sits beneath almost every major decision most people never make. The fear of being seen to fail. Think about how many things you have not done. Not because you lacked the ability, not because the opportunity wasn't there, not because you genuinely didn't want them, but because the possibility of trying and failing publicly felt worse than not trying at all. The business you didn't start, the relationship you didn't pursue, the creative work you kept private, the opinion you kept to yourself in a room where speaking it carried any risk of disagreement. The ancient calculation ran. It assessed the potential loss. It weighed the cost of failure against the cost of inaction. And it made its recommendation, don't. Not because the logic was sound, but because the system running the logic was calibrated for a world where visible failure, where being seen to be wrong or weak or insufficient by the people around you, carried consequences far more severe than anything you are likely to face today. In the ancient world, visible failure could cost you your reputation within the group, and reputation was access to resources, allies, mates, and protection. Reputation was survival infrastructure. Lose it, and you lost everything it supported, so the brain learned to protect it at almost any cost, including the cost of never risking it. And that learning is still running. In every moment of hesitation before you speak, in every piece of work you almost shared but didn't, in every version of yourself you have kept slightly back from the world because the version you showed was safer to lose. Hold that thought, because there is a second ancient fear running alongside loss aversion, and in many ways, it is even more controlling because it doesn't announce itself as fear at all. It announces itself as comfort. Your brain has a deep structural preference for the familiar, not because familiar things are better, not because they are safer in any objective sense, but because familiarity is the brain's shorthand for survived. Every familiar thing, every routine, every environment you already know, every relationship that follows predictable patterns, carries an implicit record in your brain. It has not killed you yet, which means, to the ancient threat detection system, it is probably safe. And the unfamiliar? The unfamiliar carries no such record. It is an open question. And open questions, to a brain calibrated for survival, are treated as potential threats until proven otherwise. This is why change, even change you chose, even change you genuinely want, even change that is objectively good for you, produces a resistance that doesn't respond to logic. Your conscious mind knows the new job is better. Your ancient brain only knows it is not the old one. Your conscious mind knows the relationship ended for good reasons. Your ancient brain only knows that the familiar has been replaced by the unknown. Your conscious mind knows you need to leave. Your ancient brain files a threat response for every step toward the door. The preference for the familiar is not weakness. It is not lack of ambition. It is not an inability to grow. It is the ancient fear of the unknown running its ancient calculation. In a world where the unknown was genuinely dangerous, caution was wisdom. In a world where the unknown is mostly just uncomfortable, that same caution becomes a cage. But here is the detail that makes this especially difficult to escape. The two fears work together. Loss aversion tells you the cost of failure is too high. The preference for the familiar tells you the alternative is too uncertain. Together, they form a closed loop. Stay where you are. What you have is known. What you might lose is too painful to risk. What you might gain is too uncertain to trust. And this loop runs so constantly, so automatically, so far beneath conscious deliberation that most people experience it not as a fear, but as a feeling, a vague sense that now is not quite the right time, that the conditions aren't quite right yet, that one more thing needs to fall into place before the moment is ready. The moment is rarely ready because the ancient system was not designed to recognize ready. It was designed to recognize safe, and safe, to a brain calibrated for survival, almost always looks like exactly where you already are. Now here is where something shifts, because this is where every conversation about fear usually goes wrong. It says override it, push through it, feel the fear, and do it anyway. And sometimes that works, but it misses something important. The fear is not the enemy. The fear is information. Not always accurate information, not always relevant to the actual situation, not always proportionate to the genuine risk involved, but information from a system that has been running threat assessments on behalf of your species for longer than civilization has existed. A system that is sometimes wrong about the specific threat, but is almost never wrong about the presence of something that matters. The tightness in your chest before the conversation you have been avoiding is not just anxiety, it is the brain flagging that something in this situation carries weight. The resistance you feel toward the change you know you need is not just fear. It is the ancient system telling you that something is at stake. The question is not whether to feel it. The question is what you do once you recognize what it is. Because there is a difference between fear that is protecting you from something genuinely dangerous and fear that is protecting you from something merely uncomfortable. And the ancient system does not make that distinction on its own. That distinction is yours. Which means that the most important skill you may ever develop is not courage in the conventional sense, not the absence of fear, not the ability to push through it blindly, but the ability to look at a fear clearly enough to ask a single question. Is what I am afraid of losing worth what I am not doing to protect it? Because loss aversion tells you the loss is too painful, but it doesn't tell you whether the thing you are protecting is worth the cost of that protection. And familiarity tells you the known is safer than the unknown, but it doesn't tell you whether the known is worth staying for. Those answers are not available from the ancient system. They require something the ancient system wasn't built to provide. Perspective, the ability to see not just what could be lost, but what is already being lost. Every day the conversation doesn't happen. Every year the work stays private. Every version of a life not started because the one already in motion felt safer to keep. The ancient fear was never trying to trap you. It was trying to protect you. In a world where the threats were real and the losses were final and the stakes of a single wrong decision could end everything. But you are not living in that world. You are living in one where most of what the ancient fear is protecting you from is not danger. It is just the feeling of danger. And the difference between those two things is the entire distance between the life you are living and the one the fear has been quietly making sure you never quite reach.